Hey everyone, this is Dr. Jamie Marich, also known as the Unicorn System, and I'd like to welcome you to this next interview that I am doing here for Pride Month. And I like to feature content anyway on ICM's pages, on my pages for Pride Month. And we have the special focus this month of also promoting the new Dissociation Made Simple Flipchart, which is out on July 9th officially. The audio recording still has the original release date of June 25th. And if you stay to the end of this interview, I will give you a special code to be able to access a discount for getting the Dissociation Made Simple Flipchart. So this month I've been really impassioned. We've been really interested in talking about plural pride and gay pride, LGBTQIA plus pride, and where there are some points of intersections. And I thought of no better individual system to interview for this than my friend Katie Keech, who I'm happy to welcome. Thanks for joining me, Katie.
Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
So tell us a little bit about yous and how you identify.
Let's see. I use they, them pronouns. I identify as non-binary. I'm gender fluid, so sometimes will present more butch, sometimes present more femme. That also depends on who's out with the system and how they want to present. I identify as pansexual, and demisexual as well. So I don't know if people are familiar with that term and if I should.
Explain it. I know what it means, but some listeners may not.
Sure, sure. So pansexual is similar to bisexual, except it sort of looks at more of a range of different gender spectrum, or gender expansive identities. And demisexual means that I don't get attracted to somebody until I know them. Like otherwise it's just aesthetic. They look nice, but there's not really like that charge that people get when they just see a person that's a kind of expected. And I think a lot of the people that I work with, and even for myself, like it was so confusing growing up because it was expected you were supposed to have that. And then so a lot of us would just pretend because we're supposed to, and it kind of felt a little weird. So it's been nice to know that, yeah, this is actually a thing.
Yeah, beautiful. And we identified as demisexual for quite a long time, for
Mhm.
most of life. And then we had some shifts in our life where that no longer feels like a valid identifier for us. Yet so much of, I think, the welcoming of LGBTQIA plus pride is that it's all valid.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's great to have a lot of different kinds of spectrum of attraction of all kinds recognized, because for a lot of, I think even like psychiatric history, it was pathologized or assumed that it was a trauma response if somebody was asexual or didn't want to connect with somebody. Something was wrong with that person and that had to get fixed. So, of course, queer identity is included. So.
So, whether it's from the queer perspective, the plural perspective, what does pride mean to you?
It means quite a lot. I grew up in an area that was very conservative and very right wing. So the idea of having anything like a rainbow flag out was dangerous. We had somebody out, I think, in my high school when I first started, and they got assaulted by football team because that's what happened then. Um, so having the ability to say, what and who you are, and have that be not only respected but celebrated is a big thing. I think when I moved up to the Bay Area, um, people were more used to having that kind of thing in the 2000s, having rainbow flags out, having the identity. And people were like, why are people doing this? It seems kind of strange. But growing up where I grew up, it was great to see all of that and people being able to do that and being welcoming of those different kinds of symbols, because it just wasn't allowed.
Yeah, yeah. So you are from the Bay Area, and you also, if you're comfortable talking about it, have another identity, right? As Sister Freda. So tell
Yeah. So I am Sister Freda Desire of the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence. I've been with them since 2014, I think, is when I started my process. It's a long, it takes a while to become a full sister. You have to do a lot of volunteering, showing that you're going to show up, showing that you're going to be part of the group in terms of being responsible for stuff. And then you have to do some kind of fundraiser or community activity, and then can become a sister. So, yeah.
So tell us how the sisters came to be, because I think for a lot of religious people, especially a lot of Catholic people, the
Yeah.
sisters are erroneously known as these drag queens who mock Catholicism, yet it's really not about that at all.
No, no. I mean, we are nuns to the community. Um, we started in 1979, and at that point in time, it was kind of a bit of like, what are we doing? I wasn't around then, so I'm kind of speaking more the we for the group. There were some young queer men who had happened to have some nuns costumes, and the gay aesthetic at that time was very like mustache and jeans, like, and butch, and so femme queer folk were a little more marginalized if they were male identified, and so they wanted to put the nuns frocks on and kind of just liven things up. And that caught a lot of attention, but people were really actually really excited about it, and they weren't prepared for that reaction. And so they kind of kept that up. That sort of slid into then the AIDS epidemic hit. And that time was called gay cancer. They didn't call it AIDS yet. And people were wanting some kind of something like religion for them. They wanted the comfort, they wanted people to care for them, people were scared, and most of the churches were turning their backs on gay people and queer people and lesbians, saying they deserved this. Reagan was pretty instrumental in saying queer people deserve this, and didn't give funding for the support to even investigate what was necessarily going on. And so we did the first fundraiser for well, at that time, Gay Cancer for AIDS at that time in San Francisco. And we just kind of kept growing. We kept doing fundraisers. We did confessionals for people who wanted to unburden themselves, although we don't believe in, we're not a religious group. We don't believe in sin. We believe that people should be celebrated and should let go of the concept of guilt and sin. That's not helpful, because we've been, as queer people, shamed for so long for who we are, and we wanted the opposite. We wanted joy and pride and self-love, so we wanted to spread that however we could. The whole thing about perpetual indulgence is that you are perpetually approved of. You are okay as you are, and we wanted to validate that. So
Brilliant. So between being a sister, between having your practice in the Bay Area, which is historically known as the center of the gay rights movement in the United States, um, what have you learned about activism, especially as an activist for Pride?
yeah, I think, and I think we're kind of doing this bit with the plural movement right now as well. Asking politely doesn't work. A lot of queer people tried to do things, especially before the AIDS crisis hit, about asking politely, presenting as respectable and in the lines of what you were supposed to look like, and in terms of like gender norms and what society prescribes as respectable. People tried really, really hard to do that, for the most part, to say we deserve our rights because we're just like you. And that didn't work. It wasn't gaining respect. There were still a lot of things. Marginalization from police around, like, people were getting arrested just for existing or going to queer spaces, or getting blackmailed for being, teachers been secretly being gay. And so with the sisters and also the Coquettes, which is another theater group that some of the sisters arose from, which is a very flamboyant group, just kind of said, this isn't working. We need to be loud and we need to be who we are, and we need to be who we are and demand to be accepted in different spaces and call things out. Of course, that was called like, oh, you're being inappropriate and you're being, loud and you shouldn't, be doing all of this. You're ruining it. One of the things for the sisters, the tagline is, because people were saying we were ruining it for everybody since 1979. But but that's kind of what started to turn the tide, was being loud and inappropriate. ACT UP would do things like die-ins in church spaces to get attention. That's where they would go and just like fall down and pretend to be dead in large groups, because wanted to call attention to that churches and government was not caring about how many people died. And it was like almost like a war zone for people, and people lost dozens, if not, sometimes hundreds, like of friends. And we still have lost a lot of our elders because people didn't care. People didn't care. So being polite just doesn't work. You have to be loud. You have to get in spaces where you're not welcome, and you have to make a lot of noise. And I think with the Plural Pride movement, we are kind of doing that, because with the academic spaces and the clinical spaces, I know that they'll deny it. People don't like to really look in the mirror and know that they have bigotry against something that they work with, or look down on something that they work with. But I have definitely heard so many micro and even macroaggressions from people in clinical spaces who work with DID and plural folks, that it's appalling. And it's not an accident that very few people who work with DID have been out as having the disorder, and that there has been only one person on the board of ISSTD since its inception that has ever been out.
Yeah. Yeah. So now shifting gears to Plural Pride, can you share with our listeners as much of your coming out story as you're willing to right now?
Sure. I knew that I was plural around when it's my mid-20s. I ran across a comic called Cuckoo, by Madison Clell. And I knew there was something different about me. I think even like some parents, they weren't necessarily nice about it, but had pointed out that they thought that I had DID in high school. And I wasn't real thrilled about that. And but then I saw this thing, and I related to it because it wasn't medical, it wasn't pathologizing, it was just kind of exploring what it's like to exist as that. And that was the first thing I'd ever seen like that. And then I started reading hundreds of books about DID in general. And I didn't, you know, it's because it's such a thing that it's so shamed. Everybody says it's so rare, or you're trying to get attention if you have it. So telling people that you're plural has been kind of globally considered a very shameful thing. You just don't do it. You just don't talk about it. And at least that's what the messaging everywhere that I got. There's something wrong with you. And if it either you're lying and you're trying to get attention, or you are very, very sick.
Right.
Right. Which is something they would say about gay people, right? You should keep in the closet. You're very, very sick. Yeah. And I think that I didn't feel like there was anything to necessarily be proud about until I started to stumble on It's funny, like on Twitter with the plural community, there were a few folks, and my different selves were like kind of having this struggle. Like I was on the board of ISSTD. I knew that the atmosphere was not welcoming around coming out. And yet I we wanted we wanted to be part of this group. And so sometimes we would start to come out and then we would erase it because of like, oh God, we can't do that. And I started to also read a book called Neuroqueer Heresies. Actually, I read their dissertation first, her dissertation. But yeah, Dr. Nikki Walker, that time published by Nick Walker, and going through the ways that they accepted their autism and talking about neurodiversity, and how that's a really important part of culture, and talking about the ways culture looks at that was something that just kind of flipped a switch for us.
Yeah.
And just didn't want to hide it anymore. And I know there had been bits and starts where I had come out when I was when I was getting my license for being an LMFT, and it never really went super well. And so then I closeted again, but I thought, well, if I'm on the board, I should come out because nobody's come out before. It would be a really good role model for a lot of people to show that people don't need to be ashamed of it, that people can be in different positions of society with this, that that it's okay. And so I just sort of took that step and left left a tweet out and started connecting a bit with different people in the community at that point. It was hard.
Yeah, and we still remember the day you reached out to us, and uh about us, no love lost with us, and who I generally call the establishment, the more academic establishment around dissociation, because and I've been very clear, and I want to be clear here, like I do not discredit or disparage the work that a lot of them have done with research, and some of that research being able to advocate for plural folks.
Mhm.
I lose a lot of respect when there's this cutting off of lived experience, especially those of us who are clinicians that are really speaking boldly about lived experience. Essentially, and this is what resonated when you were talking about LGBT pride, not being polite. Because
Mhm.
we've gotten a lot of feedback in the vein of, you're too loud, you're too bold, you're too mouthy, to like we have a part, especially 9, who just thinks all of this field is bullshit and how they go about doing things. uh so yeah, we made a decision probably around the mid 2010s to speak our truth our own way, and if various establishments and institutions would embrace it, great, but if they wouldn't, we wouldn't try to beg for their attention, because uh I as somebody who grew up very religious on the queer side of my identity, I felt that I begged for many years to either be seen and validated as I am, or I pretended to be something I was not. And with any of my identities, I'm just not prepared to do that anymore.
Yeah, it's exhausting. I think a lot of folks that I work with and talk to, and I'm sure you have too, and I've experienced this myself, the stress of masking being plural is exhausting.
Yes.
And I don't think, I mean, I never hear anybody talk about that in the establishment. I never hear any of that in any of the books or anything around how much of a drain and how much, shame it creates in the conversations and the stress that masking causes, causes on people who are plural to be viewed as just one. And even a lot of the clinical treatment models really lean towards that you should present as one. You should have one adult that's talked to talk to the others in the back. You should not have kids come out. You should basically it's like training you to appear as a singlet in the hopes that somehow that'll magically make you a singlet. But I mean, most of us have been trying to pass a singlet for our entire lives, and it's part of what has caused some of the trauma, you know.
I mean, I know, and I've shared this in my writing and in other talks and interviews, that I was diagnosed in 2004
Mhm.
formally, but there was a very implicit messaging that I received from my interactions with the field. And I don't think my therapist ever directly promoted this, but it was implicit that you don't really want to broadcast this.
Mhm.
It zipped in. And so much of the messaging from the field as well is that wellness equaled being able to be grounded and being able to be apparently normal.
Yeah.
And we walked that line for about a decade.
Mhm.
And then the veneer started to crack slowly, and we started coming out slowly in spaces where we felt safe enough to do that. And in 2018, it was a pure, we're just not willing to do this anymore. And we came out very fully about our sexuality in 2015, because that was another area where anybody who truly knew us, friends, partners, knew about our bisexuality, our queerness. We came out to ourselves at 19, and then after we left formal religion, we started telling more and more people. We even started coming out to certain professionals in our life. And then in 2015, for a lot of reasons, I just made a decision that I had to come out fully in every area of my life, not just to select people. And doing so at a public level meant I had to come out to my very religious family,
Mhm.
which was very, very hard. But I think coming out about my sexuality and the freedom I felt with that ultimately impacted me coming out about plurality, uh,
Mhm.
which honestly has not felt as big of a deal in the general public. It's more been in the field amongst fellow therapists where she's talking about it openly. And yet, I truly cannot emphasize enough how much better we feel that we're not masking.
Mhm.
Most people get that who kind of teach the party line about plurality and dissociation.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing scary or wrong about appearing as different selves, even kids' selves. I mean, there's nothing honestly that weird about it unless, you really value being an adult, which I mean, it's not always that great.
Yes, it's overrated. Many circumstances. So, Katie, what do you think the plural pride movement can learn from the gay pride, queer pride, LGBTQ pride movement and how it's evolved?
Uh-huh. Well, I mean, the one thing like we were talking about is that being how the establishment would like you to be and being the correct plural, because I have heard that, not the correct, but I've heard, we have to have the correct DID person represent this. That's something I've heard.
Uh,
Like, yeah, not paraphrasing. Um, anyway, sorry. It doesn't really work because it doesn't really help the community. It doesn't actually advance what we're about. If we define ourselves from what, I don't know, in neurodiversity language, the neuronorm is, a lot of that is kind of built around fascism. Like there really is no neuronormativity. It's based on what goes well for a streamlined culture that you can market stuff to, that's going to step in line, that's going to not have differences, it's not going to have a bunch of ideas bouncing off of each other. Um, so being who you are authentically is going to cause waves, and people are not going to like it, and it's not going to be seen as well, because you know that being queer was in the DSM for a very, very long time. So um, anything that kind of deviates starts to get pathologized, things that don't need to be pathologized get pathologized. Sure, there are issues with trauma and there are issues with the effects of the trauma, but being plural in and of itself doesn't necessarily cause people problems in and of itself.
Right.
And I think that doesn't ever get talked about in the establishment.
Correct. And that's why a lot of us are moving towards using language like I'm a person with dissociative identities, or we're a system with dissociative identities, we're a person with dissociative experience. Because, yes, I do believe at one point for us, it met clinical criteria for a disorder when we
Mhm.
were diagnosed. And there was another point in our life when we had a pretty significant flare where, yeah, I would say you could use the Western language of disorder as meant by the DSM. Yet it's really something that many of us have come to embrace. This is just how our minds are. And we can live an active, thriving life when we learn not to shame that.
Exactly. Yeah, and if the shame part is, and you know this real well, and is the most damaging part, right, of DID. And so being able to help people feel some confidence in the fact that they have selves and they are there and they exist,
Mm-hmm.
it's a lot of the damage away and causes more communication, it causes more understanding, it causes a lot of the stuff that clinically people want to move towards, and yet it seems to be discouraged in clinical work overall.
Why do you think that is?
I I think it's because people who are a certain way single, or have embraced what's, I said before, the neural norm. I think that anything that deviates from that is sick or strange. And so automatically you have to pop back into that mold of, however, neuronormativity. You have, if you deviate, it's a problem. So and things are looked at. I mean, all of the stuff generally, I have some questions about whether Putnam was plural or not, but uh, have generally been written by singlets who are trying to understand plurals from a singlet lens, and pathologizing what they see automatically, that they're thinking, well, this has to be a problem, and how can we then take this poor delusional deer who thinks that they are eight, whatever, I'm just picking a number, eight people, and kind of just gel them back in so they'll fit back into society the way that it's comfortable for us.
Something that resonated that I want to highlight is the poor delusional deer. That is an attitude we have picked up on from a lot of people, who do purport to be our advocates, that they're doing this to help because of their, yes, but poor delusional deer is an archetype I have felt implicitly placed on us and our community as well. So thank you for bringing that attention. So, I know a final question I have, because I really, really want your take on this, because this is a criticism that I heard a bit ago when I was equating LGBT gay pride to plural pride.
Mhm.
Somebody said, we know now, and it's very well established, people are not queer as a result of abuse, that people are queer, people are trans, that's just who they are.
Mhm.
And so, of course, that's something to be proud of. Whereas people with DID or OSDD are generally that way as a result of significant abuse. That's not something they asked for. So it's going to be natural to have more shame come along with it. So maybe it's something that's not so easy to be proud of. Just any thoughts on any of that criticism?
Well, I'm having a couple of different thoughts. One is that, you know, I mean, I think I voiced my questions around plurality in general, as is it a neurotype that responds differently to trauma,
No.
and expand, create selves but because some people have significant amounts of even the same in an early trauma and don't seem to have the same reaction of becoming, having more and more plurality. So there's that. And so that's just a different brain type and style, is something to be proud of in terms of managing trauma in a different way that supported being able to continue and manage the stress in ways that I think some other people just can't do. I think even if it entirely, all of it, because I'm agnostic in a lot of things. I like to not know, because that leaves me open to having more questions and learning more.
Thank
Um,
you.
if it entirely isn't from trauma, then I mean the establishment itself seems to always say that line, like, well, this saved you. This was a very creative da 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 to save you, to manage, so you didn't. I don't know. They never say exactly what you would do otherwise. But I don't know. I think sometimes they say that you wouldn't have schizophrenia, but I think that's kind of pejorative to people who have schizophrenia. And there's a lot of I could go into a little side pocket on that, uh, but then if that's true, then you should then why aren't we popping up the pride around the differences in the way that our brains manage the stress? That is something to be proud of. The creativity, um, the ways to pocket some of the awareness of the trauma so that it isn't always present, is something to celebrate. And the trauma itself and the people that did the crap,
Mm-hmm.
of course, those are not that is where the shame belongs.
Correct. Correct. And Katie led a panel discussion that we had the privilege of being on for this year's Plural Positivity World Conference. You can access that on YouTube, about this idea of gatekeeping what even qualifies, right, as a DID or OSDD diagnosis. And I think there are going to be exciting discussions in the coming years and decades around, is plurality just a way of being in the world that many of us are naturally inclined to, and some of us happen to be severely traumatized and others are not, and who are we to judge?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I did a panel on this myself here. ICM did the panel on plural pride with a few other contributors from the flip chart. You can also access that on YouTube. And something that LS Scarborough said, they're a contributor in Dissociation Made Simple, is, yeah, I didn't ask to be queer. I didn't ask to be trans. But I didn't ask for the trauma either. And I think
Mm-hmm.
a very wonderful response that uh, this is just how my brain is for things I didn't ask for, that I have no control over. So
Uh-huh.
for me, the connections have been clear between queer pride and plural pride. And I think the biggest cohesive connecting point is that coming out of the closets has had a positive effect and impact on our mental health. And I say that carefully recognizing that some people are not safe to be out of a closet. And I'm not wanting to force anybody out. Uh, and I do hope it's something that you can explore.
Yeah, I think that, gosh, there was some anti-trans person recently, and I can't remember their name, who had said that trans people, in a way to denigrate them, when they come out and or suspiciously happy, because there is so much more prejudice that people have to face if you're who you are, but there's also a lot of joy in being out in who you are. And so they kind of framed it as an illness to be proud of who you are and feel good about being open as some kind of strange problem. But I think, even though being out as plural does attract certainly problems, it is kind of a relief to not have to watch our step so many different times or in different ways. It can just be, and that that does make us happy.
Yes. So I think that's a good note to wrap up on. Katie, tell us where we can find you on social media or otherwise connect with you.
Sure. I'm neuroqueer therapist on TikTok. I am X is formerly Twitter. Katie Keech MFT, and I have katiekeech.com is my website. So
Wonderful. And you want to mention the refractory at all?
yes, definitely. Thanks. Yes, and the Refractory is an organization. I think we have about 113 so far, international clinicians, researchers, peers, coaches, and some mental health, like nurses and doctors are part of our group. And we all collaborate together. We are creating spaces where we can dialogue and communicate with each other so we can figure out what we are doing different as people with lived experience with plurality. Because everybody who's a member has lived experience with plurality, and having that space to kind of feel good and be able to unmask with each other and just be and talk, because is there to generate the different ideas around what can then we do with that to change the models of clinical work so that it's better and it works better for plurals overall, and how can we then create systems to implement that. And so far it's working. I think we are going to try to work on, I know that you already have like a clinical training led by plurals, yeah, with the creative.
Well, Institute for Creative Mindfulness, we do a training called Navigating Self-Disclosure. I offer that about 2 times a year. So specific to the self-disclosure, that's what we do. We also do various clinical trainings. Our jam, though, has mostly been in clinical trainings to serve EMDR therapists because we're primarily an EMDR training organization. A lot of the advanced trainings that we do are for EMDR therapists, but yeah, consider checking out where I think by time this interview has aired, our June run of Navigating Self-Disclosure will have ended. But I have one coming up in July that's more Europe based. It's more Europe friendly time zone because I have a European friend who's hosting us for that. You could find out about all the trainings that I do at jamiemarich.com. That's kind of a good central database of everything that I do connected to plurality and connected to the book projects.
Mm. Yeah, definitely. So we in the Refractory are just starting to work on trainings for folks from an entirely plural lens for clinicians who work with plurality, and hopefully getting like a certification program running, but initially working on just the general trainings, especially on topics that people don't tend to train on at all, such as like uh, gender expansiveness in plural systems and how to work with that better and what that means. So
Wonderful. Well, Katie, dear friends, thank you for joining us for this interview. And I just want to remind folks that the Dissociation Made Simple Flipchart is available because of some production delays. The release date got bumped for the book to July 9th, but I'll put the link in the show notes for this on where you can pre-order. And you can use this code I'm about to give you to get a pretty substantial, I think, 25% discount plus shipping included in the continental US. Flipchart 35, all capital letters, Flipchart 35. If you order directly through Penguin Random House and the link I'm going to give you, you can use that code to get your discount on the Dissociation Made Simple Flipchart. And if you liked this content that we're making available to you on a complimentary basis and you want to make some kind of a donation towards an LGBTQ plus advocacy organization, please consider supporting the LGBT Center of Cleveland. They're an organization here in Northeast Ohio where I'm based that I'm really amplifying this month for Pride. I will also put a link if you want to make a donation to them here on the page. So thank you, Katie, for joining us. And hopefully we can keep having more conversations like this.
thanks for inviting me, Jamie's.